South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham and his Democratic challenger Jamie Harrison are running neck and neck in South Carolina, both with 48% compared to voters in the state, according to recent Quinnipiac University polls.
And in Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins is facing a very serious re-election fight, as well as recent polls from Real Clear Politics show that Democratic challenger Sarah Gideon may be edging out the incumbent senator. Managing editor at Sabato's Crystal Ball, Kyle Kondik, joins us now to tell us what the passing of Justice Ginsburg may do to these races and the political climate in general. It's always great to see you, Kyle.
Good to see you, Kyle.
Before we dig into specific races here, just lay out what you think the Supreme Court opening RBG's passing does to the political atmosphere at the presidential level, the Senate level, how we should be thinking about this.
Well, look, I do think that it's obviously a very important development, but that said, there are a lot of indicators that the electorate is already very, very enthusiastic about this election. That turnout already was slated to be pretty high, even, despite the pandemic. And so, it adds more fuel on the fire, but the fire was already burning pretty hot. So I just wonder if it'll have that dramatic of an effect, particularly because there's been so much that's happened this year. And I don't necessarily know if kind of the big picture indicators, be it the president's approval rating or his national polling deficit against Joe Biden, it's gotten a little bit worse for the president, but it hasn't gotten dramatically worse. So I think we ought to wait and see before, thinking about if there's going to be some sort of huge shift here.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, as I understand it, you guys have some changes that you're making in terms of different races across the country. Tell us about those changes, what they could mean for the United States Senate, which, of course, is going to be embroiled in this fight for the next 3 months.
Yeah, so we moved two of the figures who are really prominent figures in this confirmation fight, Susan Collins of Maine, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. We actually downgraded them in their ratings over the weekend. We moved Collins from toss-up to leans Democratic. We moved Graham from likely Republican to leans Republican. Although, if we start with Graham, it's actually possible that the court fight could be in his benefit ultimately. He is in a very close and competitive race against Jamie Harrison, Democrat. Harrison is raising a ton of money, and I'm sure he's raising much, much more as we speak right now because of Graham's role as the Judiciary Chairman. But at the same time, Graham has been he's had soft with Republicans a little bit back home in South Carolina, and maybe the court fight allows him to bring his base back together. With Collins, it's the opposite problem in that she needs a lot of crossover support to win, and part of the reason she doesn't have as much crossover support anymore is because of Brett Kavanaugh. Whatever she ends up doing in this court fight, I don't necessarily know if this is going to help her with her problem and allow her to generate more crossover support. It might actually take away some of her crossover support.
Yeah, that was kind of what I saw in 2018 with the polling that I was privy to, is once the Kavanaugh fight became sort of front and center, any crossover voting was basically over, right? Everybody's sort of partisan affiliations hardened into place. So if you happen to be, a Democrat trying to hold on in a blue state, that was good for you. If you're a Republican in a red state, that was good for you. If you were trying to climb uphill in a state that had a partisan tilt a little different than your partisan affiliation, it became really problematic. So what other senators would kind of fall into that category where it would either sort of harden their lead or potentially be a real problem for them going forward?
Steve Bullock, the Democratic challenger in Montana, he's going to need some crossover support to beat Steve Daines, the Republican. Maybe this allows Daines to kind of grab more of the Trump vote. Trump is doing worse in Montana than he did last time, but no one expects him to lose that state. Kansas is the same way, which is an open seat race. The Republican there, Roger Marshall, he's been struggling a little bit. Maybe this gives him kind of a shot in the arm. And then of the more kind of top-tier Senate races, I guess Montana's in that group, but Arizona and North Carolina, you've got Martha McSally and Tom Tillis. They are hugging the president very closely, in part because they need Trump to win their states, and they need there to be very little ticket splitting between the presidential race and the Senate race. Now, the president's far from guaranteed to carry either of those states, but that's really their only chance to win. And so I think we saw, Tillis and McSally back the president pretty quickly and aggressively here, and that makes sense given what they're trying to do in their races.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting that it can help some and it can hurt others dramatically. But yeah, Kyle, we have seen more than excess of $100 million raised by Act Blue since the announcement of the death of RBG on the Supreme Court. What does that tell you, that level of activation within the Democratic base, and what it could mean nationally during the presidential election?
Well, look, there's a ton of intensity there. I mean, I think fundraising could be kind of a proxy for intensity, particularly small dollar fundraising. Now, granted, the president has historically been a good small dollar fundraiser himself. But I think that if you're on the losing side of a fight like this, as it seems like the Democrats are likely to be, that anger might be more of a motivator than if you're on the winning side, and then maybe you get a little bit content. That said, I mean, the Kavanaugh fight in 2018, I think sort of the jury's still out as to what the effect might have been, and I think to Crystal's point, it probably did hurt some of those red state Democratic senators who were trying to hang on, and several of them ended up losing. But at the same time, the Democratic House gains in blue trending House districts were maybe better than we might have thought, or maybe a little bit better.
Right.
So I wonder if maybe you see a similar kind of effect where sort of it kind of even further hardens some of the divisions we've seen in American politics.
Yeah. And then, Kyle, finally, I mean, at the top of the ticket, how many voters are still left to decide at this point? And do you think that, feelings about whichever side of the divide you're on in terms of the Supreme Court opening, does this kind of like squeeze out the last few undecided voters?
There aren't that many undecideds in these polls, and so Biden is, closer to 50% than Clinton was at this time 4 years ago. But Trump is also, at polling at a higher level. So you've just got fewer undecideds, and I don't necessarily know if the undecideds necessarily break one way or the other. If you look at it, there are a lot of the undecideds are non-white voters who might be likelier to break more toward Biden than toward Trump. Although Biden has had a little bit of weakness with non-white voters, particularly Latino voters. The other thing is that I think Supreme Court fights are a kind of something that people who already have a high interest level in politics already care about. People who can name the members of the court, they're likely to be very engaged anyway. We also know that those sorts of people are already likely to be very partisan themselves. So from that standpoint, again, this is why I question whether this is necessarily going to change all that much, because the people who care about it are probably already pretty engaged to begin with.
I think that's a really good point. Kyle, thank you so much. Great to have you.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate your analysis.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, friend of the show, journalist David Sirota. He wonders if a primary challenger, Senator Chuck Schumer, would force his hand on the battle for the next Supreme Court justice.